Brevity is the soul of wit. Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2. This is Jeremy Murphy from Lincoln, Nebraska. I am the creator of the Positivity Patrol, and this is the first debate in the shows that I've produced that was intended to be a debate, using the dialectical method of debating, point by point, counterpoint, counterpunch, punch, counterpunch, intending to try to line up this two arguments for brevity and verbosity. And I'll tell you why I'm interested in this, because as an attorney, we get accused of being too verbose. We use too many words sometimes. Sometimes we use too few words, and then people are reading between the lines and they don't know where to go with something. So anyway, I'm going to go point by point. I have 10 rounds sketched out on both sides. I invite others to join the debate. Perhaps there are other rounds. Perhaps we could go 15 rounds or more. This could be a multi-part series. It just kind of depends on how much interest there is. Here we go. In deciding which side should go first, I'm allowing the side of brevity to go first. So brevity will present its first argument in its favor, and verbosity will respond. There is one essential point that I think verbosity will win. I think everyone watching this will agree. And if I'm wrong, let me know that I'm wrong. But again, I'm not sure this will be resolved today. It could be resolved many years in the future. It could be resolved well after our lifetimes, who knows. So, but the first point in favor of brevity, which packs a punch, and the thought is that less is more, that by talking less, you're saying more. It goes to Shakespeare's quote. Don't hear audio. That is not good. Okay, can you hear me now? Jeez, I did not have the volume turned up somehow. So what I'm going to do, I don't want to lose this recording because I have all this sketched out meticulously on both sides. So hopefully you can hear me now. It sounds like I can hear it in my headphones now, Lane. So if that's not the case, let me know. Still don't hear audio. Well, I'm going to pause the recording and see if we can get this resolved. Just a moment, please. This is Jeremy Murphy, and we're back. And for those of you who could not hear anything in the first couple of minutes, I apologize, but I'm going to get this back in the record. Brevity is the soul of wit. Shakespeare wrote many years ago in Hamlet. And that really sticks with us today. And that's a difficult argument to defeat. But I think arguments can be made for both brevity and verbosity. And there are some arguments that I think verbosity actually will win, at least one, perhaps two. And but I have 10 different areas where I think the two sides can dialectically oppose each other. And, the audience could vote or decide. But that would be up to you, the audience, to decide which one wins. And there's one that I'm sure that verbosity is going to win. There's just no way that brevity is going to win one argument. And maybe I slanted that, maybe I didn't. I'm not sure. I tried to keep this fair and equitable on both sides. So I'm going to go through point by point using punch, counterpunch, our argument, counter-argument. We as lawyers love to argue, and we don't get to do it very often in a productive way. But I think in something like with topics like this, I think we can use the dialectical method of argument and be able to present that in such a way that I think both sides learn something from each other. And it strengthens the positions to understand, what both sides are saying, what their arguments are, what their essential points or counterpoints are. And it just makes for a richer discussion if we can do that. And sometimes in our conversations, we're going to have to do this. We're asked to play devil's advocate, to flip an argument on its head and to argue the opposite. And we as attorneys are forced to do that constantly in the courtroom and in our daily life too. People will mention that, and we have to immediately have the counter argument or the opposite argument ready. So without further ado, here is the arguments for brevity, which packs a punch, versus verbosity, which is out to lunch. Brevity deals with less is more, and for verbosity, more is much more than more. It's really a moray into the moreness of more. Just gives you an example. Verbosity has too many words in some cases to make its argument, and sometimes verbosity should stop while it's ahead. So, point number one, argument number one in favor of brevity is the Shakespeare quote itself. To go back to Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2, brevity is the soul of wit, spoken by Polonius, and the famous or infamous words, I will be brief. And I will tell you that when attorneys say that, there is raucous laughter around the world. Many people think that we cannot be brief, but we're forced to be brief when we present legal briefs, which are not quite as brief as they should be. You know, some people try to cheat to get around the length limits, and I mentioned that in an article that's cited above. I think the Wall Street Journal wrote about it, about how attorneys are trying to skirt the length limits for legal briefs. Even using things like Microsoft Word to count words gives you a shorter legal brief than some other programs, which is interesting. That's the only one I've ever used for word processing, my legal work that I did. So point number one, so verbosity, what would verbosity say to brevity about this? Verbosity would say, brevity is too perfunctory, it's too skeletal, it's not putting meat on the bones, you have to read between the lines, that causes us to assume and presume things that may not be true, and we know what assumptions do. That it makes an ass out of you, and it makes an ass out of me. Not necessarily in that order, but we don't want to presume or assume things that are not the case. So that would be the response of verbosity. Let's see. Argument number two in favor of brevity, and I'm just going in alphabetical order. Brevity lucked out and happens to be in the alphabet before verbosity, unless you subtract some letters, which I don't think verbosity would stoop to that level. Perhaps it would, I don't know. But there's brevity's second argument would be the pithy conciseness. Brevity fits social media better. Look at Twitter. We have a 140 character limit. There aren't really ways to get around that. There are programs called Twit Longer or something like that where you can insert extra characters. But does anybody really read the extra characters? I think that's a subject to debate. I know I used to, just to kind of see what would have gotten chopped off if those people had complied with not using Twit Longer. But brevity clearly fits better for social media with length limits than verbosity does. How would verbosity respond to that? The second counter argument in favor of verbosity would be that the meaning gets lost. That there are too many assumptions with brevity. Sometimes it's so brief, the meaning is unclear, unknown. So there's speculation, and the speculation can be wrong, and we don't want to be wrong. We want to be right as much as we can, realizing that it's not always possible to be right. Sometimes we want to be right all the time, but we need to accept that we can and are often wrong. So argument number three in favor of brevity. This goes back to the movie of Amadeus. You might recall I'm trying to remember who it was. The emperor said something about too many notes, that Mozart was using too many notes, and that he needed to cut out the superfluous notes. Well, with brevity, it's with brevity, it is too many words. Too many words is the argument to verbosity. How can you sort through too many words and determine which ones are relevant or most helpful? And that's not really clear. There are how do you find the essence of what someone is saying if they're too verbose? You have to really pare down and prune down, and maybe you'll prune the wrong thing, and then what you think is the skeleton is actually the exoskeleton, and you can't find the true substance in what someone is saying. So Brevity would say that, again, the too many words, accusation against verbosity, and that the silence that brevity allows should be allowed to speak. And brevity allows for pauses for important reflection, processing, thinking, reflecting. Verbosity doesn't allow you to do that. Verbosity doesn't allow you to take a breath. Okay, argument number 3 in favor of verbosity. The response would be, there are all these awkward pauses in conversation. Silence may speak, but silence also makes people feel awkward, and we should fill all those gaps with the extra words. And some of those words may hit the mark, some may miss, but you win some, you lose some. You have to, we should try to fill all those gaps with more words. And, the argument would be that it's too quiet. The silence is too awkward. We need to fill it with something to take away the awkwardness. That argument, I'm not sure. There's good arguments on both sides. It's tough to say who would win on that point. Let's see. Number 4, we have all different kinds of writing. For lawyers, we write briefs. For bloggers, we write blogs. For people writing books, they're writing books or articles. For submission in magazines, catalogs, other publications. But the brevity would say that the legal writing was meant to be brief. No, there might be a point there, because legal, it does contain the word brief, which seems to suggest that brevity might be best. There might be some kind of length limits, and you shouldn't try to use trickery or subterfuge to get around that. But brevity would say that shorter is better, and it makes it easier to absorb. Number 4, on the argument number 4 in response, verbosity would say lawyers can't write briefs, or can they? Judges certainly don't think that we can. Judges have a couple opinions where they're just ripping attorneys for evading the length limits by trickery, or finding a word processing program that will adjust the line spacing or something like that. So, and that creates a serious issue. If you have length limits and you're submitting those in a court of law, I would suggest, as an attorney, as an officer of the court in that capacity, we need to comply with the rules, and we shouldn't be trying to skirt those rules. So, but obviously there are attorneys that write briefs that could be too brief. They may not. They may be too skeletal. It may not put enough flesh in the bones to win the argument or to win the case. And if you're doing that, you're doing a disservice to your client and the position that you're advocating. At this point, let's see. We have a question from Elaine. I'm going to pause and answer the question. Let's see. Have the character limits of Twitter helped you become more precise or concise with messaging? Absolutely. Not immediately, but I think it's forced me to be a more effective messenger. It's forced me to be more concise. And I've struggled with verbosity all my life. I don't know what it is. There's something about being an attorney and moving from being an introvert to an extrovert. It creates a situation where sometimes you're spouting out a lot of words. And I think, I guess I would refer to how Mark Twain put it, that writing is easy. All you do is you write all the words, and then you strike out all the unnecessary ones. And I think that's true to some extent. I mean, sometimes I'll be composing a tweet, and we'll be 20 characters over or whatever, and I have to determine, well, do I use twit longer or do I actually respond? Trying to shrink it without having to go to that length. Do I stay within the conventional way of using Twitter? And I've decided I'm going to try to be conventional and use that in that fashion so that people are not frustrated by someone having a bunch of twit longer tweets where you have to click on the link to read the actual statement. And, it was good when Twitter took the limits off the direct messages were formerly limited to 140 characters also. And some of those got pretty cryptic to the point that we would abbreviate things to the extent that people would have to ask us, what the heck does that abbreviation mean? Or well, what is this emoji? I've never seen this before. So I think for me, it has helped a lot with becoming more concise or precise. But I have to recognize that some people are not on Twitter, and they still want things presented with skeleton, but with flesh in the bones. So it's maybe somewhere in the middle, but it's not to the point of just being unnecessarily verbose, where you're completely losing. We're just completely losing people, and they're falling asleep while you're trying to find the right words or the right argument. That there's I guess an accusation could be made against Verbosity that it's just like throwing a bunch of spaghetti on the wall and seeing which spaghetti will stick, and hoping that you cooked it long enough so some of it sticks. Somehow this reminds me of an old relationship in college where a former friend, we debated how long you have to cook spaghetti al dente to get it to stick to the wall. And, people that are verbose, sometimes that's what it feels like. That's what it seems like. They're just throwing spaghetti out there and hoping something will stick. This is something we need to think about with blabs too. There are many blabs that are way too short. There are many blabs that, in my opinion, are way too long. If a blab is 8 or 10 hours or more, I'm sorry, you lose me. I need an outline or something, unless I'm taking notes or it's of extraordinary value. Maybe you have extraordinary people being interviewed or participating, but just sorting through the verbosity, if you will, to get to I want to know what's essential. What do I really need to know? What are the 3 nuggets I can take away from this blab? And if I have to wade through 12 to 15 hours to figure that out, that's a problem. How do we find the time to do that? So I think if we have more focused blabs of shorter length, I think people that do that will cut through the noise on blab. Their content will rise. They're going to attract more followers because they're focused. They're focused on what's essential, and they're not going to take you down all these rabbit holes that might not have a lot of relevance in their life. But of course, any person creating a blab, I realize that sometimes it takes keeping the record open a long time to get the nuggets that you need. And sometimes we as attorneys in the courtroom, sometimes if you probe with questioning, you get the answers that you need. And sometimes that could take 3 hours. It could take 30 minutes. It just kind of depends on the situation and the issues involved. So I recognize that if it's a more serious topic, it's going to take more length. If it's a really serious topic, though, maybe think about breaking it into, a 3-part series or something. Allow people to come back for 2-hour segments or something like that. That's a good way to help people really see where you're going and to see how it would build on the original foundation and to, build up to a 3rd or 5th level if you're going to do a multi-part series. Okay. We're going to get back to the arguments in favor of brevity and verbosity. And on this point, number 5, I don't think there's any dispute that brevity will lose this argument. And perhaps I slanted it, perhaps I didn't, but I had to have this issue intersecting with these 2 sides and decided to put it here. But when it comes to negativity, brevity is better. the brevity theory on this would be let it wither in the vine. If we're going to be self-critical with negativity or directed at others, it's best if we don't say it at all. Actually, we might as well allow it to extinguish itself. And the counter argument with verbosity that I think would defeat brevity here is that with positivity, verbosity is better, because verbosity can reinforce the positive messages, the self-talk that we have with ourselves. And if we're talking to others that way and using positive language, complimentary language, supportive language, cooperative language, I think that's more helpful. And in that kind of situation, the repetition allows that to sink in. It allows it to sink in internally to the point that we have more self-confidence. We become more positive, more happy. That radiates to other people. And that has a transformative effect, not only upon us, but upon the whole world if we take that seriously. So, at this point, brevity would lose. Verbosity has this argument nailed. There's just it allows us to become much more resilient, powerful, tougher. We develop a thicker skin if we have more self-confidence and positivity involved. So in this argument, verbosity would win. And I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about, there's an event called positivity.com on Friday, December 4th. And that's 2 days from now. And Sandra Santorino is hosting it. I think it goes from 9 a.m. Eastern until 5 p.m. Eastern. And I know Brian Fanzo and others are signed up to give short speeches or accounts on in defense of positivity. I'm hoping to pop in and join them if I can for a little bit. I'll be traveling on Friday, but I wanted to use this as an opportunity to remind anyone that's watching or listening to this to check out Positivity Con, C-O-N, on Friday, December 4th from 9 to 5 p.m. Eastern, and check with Sandra Santorino for details on that. Okay, for number 6, we turn to humor. We have to break this up with a little bit of funny things, and I thought of a way to do this, and so it's going to be with an example, and I'm going to take you back to the 1960s. And that's helpful for me because I was born in the 1960s, although I don't remember them very well. I was only around for a couple of years of that decade, but some of you might remember more of the 60s than I do. But here is the sentence that I would use in defense of brevity on this point. And perhaps this one, verbosity, might win also just because it's a funnier interpretation of the same sentence. But the brevity version of this sentence, a horse is a horse. And of course, the verbosity version, I'm going to look up the exact quote because I'm going to miss it if I don't. A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course, unless, of course, the horse, of course, is the famous Mr. Ed. So there was a show in the 1960s called Mr. Ed that involved a horse, and it was black and white, and it was very funny, and still is today, which explains why it's still around. And that's something that I think you can't deny the simplicity of a horse is a horse, although that's sort of self-evident. But if you want to really the Mr. Ed interpretation, it has an echo effect. So you have the echoes resonate, and for some reason this reminds me of the Notre Dame fight song. There's some language about awakening echoes, and I'm embarrassed I don't know the words by heart. My brother's going to kill me that I didn't look up the words before this blab. My brother's an alum of Notre Dame, but there's something about awakening the echoes or something like that. the echoes of the Four Horsemen from the New Rockney days. So think about horses. Maybe somebody who watches this or listens to it will be someone that owns horses or has in the past, and maybe you'll have some reflection on which horse position is correct. Meanwhile, I'm struck by the irony of being a little horse myself, but we'll press on. Let's see. On to the next point, number 7. Argument number 7 in behalf of brevity. Meaningless repetition can be avoided, so it should be. Pretty simple. And number 7, the response by verbosity would be written learning, but don't overdo it. If you do overdo it, you're being perhaps verbose on top of verbose, and multi-layer verbosity is to be avoided, I think, perhaps, maybe. I don't know. You have to throw a couple extra words in there, and I think you can interpret which one should be thrown out or deleted. Let's see, number 8. Argument number 8 on behalf of simplicity. On behalf of brevity, simplicity. As a philosopher, as a philosophy major, I was struck by the impact of Occam's razor, of the thought that the simplest theory to explain something is frequently the best, or perhaps always the best, depending on what the issue is. Some things can't be simplified past a certain point. You know, with mathematics, we have a common denominator. You have a point beyond which you can't really go without carving up fractions maybe more than they should be. But so that, you know, Occam's razor is a pretty powerful argument that I think a lot of people have lost sight of, or they don't know what it is, and it's something we need to think about. Number 8, the response by verbosity to that would be, not everything is simple. Let complexity live, breathe, move, and have its being. Because let's face it, some things like, what is the meaning of life? Or what is, I mean, to make it even more complex, what is the metaphysical meaning of life? You could fill countless pages of human knowledge and still not scratch the surface of that. You're still just, it's kind of a tip of the iceberg thing. We don't know certain things that we should know in order to fully explain that. So all we have is our common knowledge, and we can rely on everyone that's here and every recording of history we have to try to piece that together. But it's like a puzzle. Some pieces will be missing, and some will not. So we'll only see so much. But some things are extraordinarily complex, like that. You know, some things lend themselves to short blog posts. Some things lend themselves to lengthy blog posts, which later become portions of a book. You know, a lot of authors are using blog posts to help write their books, and I'm using that on you know, strategically with my situation. I wrote a long blog post about international adoption, and I'm using that to as a springboard to start the adoption book that I'm currently writing, and you know, in increments, and trying to write it one letter at a time. But those letters are lengthy, and by necessity, because they're fleshing out the whole story. They're explaining what adoption is to people at a deep level and not just at a surface level. You know, if someone's going to adopt or be a part of an adoption, you really want them to understand what they're getting into. You want to understand the wonderful parts of it, the pitfalls, the things to avoid, you know, and so that has to be fleshed out, and that requires a lot of words. It requires perhaps more words than we might think. Argument number 9 in favor of brevity. You can more easily identify the golden nuggets, if there are such things, and they're just not hidden as well if you have fewer words to sort through to get to the point. The response by verbosity is a needle in a haystack. It's the intellectual challenge. You have someone putting 800 words out there, and you have to boil it down to a 10-word summary. That's going to be pretty difficult unless you've already received a copy of that script, and maybe you've already pruned it. Maybe you know what the main idea is, but the needle in a haystack thing is a really difficult issue for a lot of us. We struggle with, whether we can even absorb, understand, digest, outline, or follow someone if they're going to meander all over the place. We don't know where they're going, and that makes it harder to understand where they're going. And although I love philosophical tangents, as long as I have time to hear them and absorb them, because it makes you think. It's thought-provoking. So there is a thought-provoking element to this. And I don't have that in here as one of the arguments or counter-arguments, but that would be attached to the needle in the haystack response. And the final point on behalf of brevity cuts to the heart of the matter. It's self-evident. The core is visible. You don't have to peel the onion. It's already peeled. You're looking at the pith or the pit of the apple or pear fruit, whatever you want to call it. It's already visible. The pithiness is in the conciseness, like I said earlier. At number 10, the response by verbosity would be just the challenge of summarizing something. It's the intellectual challenge involved helps us advance and become more intelligent. We're able to understand complex things. Some things are not as simple. Some things lend themselves to more complexity. So that would be the final response to verbosity. And I invite anyone watching this or listening to it to tally the points. I do not know who wins, so I'm going to call it a draw. And I don't do that arbitrarily. I do that because I want to allow the objectivity or subjectivity. You have to weigh that into these arguments too. There's a little bit of spillover between the different points. But this is something that I think all of us need to think about with how we write, what we write, how we speak, whether we're using too many words, too few words. Maybe we can strive for a happy medium. Maybe there is a way to find a happy medium, to stick to it and realize that in some cases, brevity is better. If you're delivering the punchline to a joke and you have a one-word punchline, that's very attractive. If you can summarize an entire thing with a one-liner, that's very helpful. But some things are too complex, and some jokes are too complex to have a one-word punchline. Some topics are too complex to be summarized in less than one sentence. You need perhaps a full paragraph or more to really be able to put flesh in the bones. So, I would say the skeletal nature of brevity, we can't say it wins in every case. And we can't say that that the meat on the bones is excessive in every case with the case of verbosity. But I think we should keep in mind that these are guideposts we can use in our writing, in our reading, in our speaking, in our blabbing, in our collaborations, and try to find some kind of happy medium, and to recognize that each side can raise essential points that could be won or lost, but that in other cases, perhaps verbosity wins some of these, like in the positivity issue. With negativity, brevity's better, though it's probably actually better to bury negativity entirely. So that's what I would propose. But once again, this has been the first point-by-point debate or point-counterpoint type of discussion hoping to have more of these, but I'm trying to identify dialectically opposed topics like this that will help people in their daily life as individuals, relationships, entrepreneurs. I think we all need to look at topics like this and see how they can help us in reframing how we write, read, hear, listen, speak. I think it's important to be conscious that some people will think we're using too many words and some will think we're using too few. And perhaps it's best to put a little more flesh in the bones and put it somewhere in the middle, find the happy medium, but recognize some cases will call for brevity and brevity will be better. If we're brief, we're not going to say things we regret as much, although sometimes we may be too perfunctory. If we're too verbose, we're going to have a lot of people losing patience with what we're saying and ask us to get to the point. And if we use some self-awareness of verbosity and gravitate back towards brevity a little bit, I think that's extremely helpful. And that's something that we as attorneys, I think, are all recovering verbose people. Some of us are recovering a little faster than others. Some of us may never recover. Some attorneys just go on. And so that's why I'm going to end this rather abruptly to prove that I'm not one of those people anymore. So I want to thank you for joining us. This has been the first discussion or debate on brevity versus verbosity, and hope to have more on this topic and others, looking for other debate topics. So if any of you can think of some that are dialectically opposed like this, please let me know, and I'd be happy to pursue those. Once again, my name is Jeremy Murphy, the creator of the Positivity Patrol. You can find the Positivity Patrol at positivitypatrol.com. And let's see, the next Positivity Patrol blab is tomorrow. I have a show on magnifying your greatest expectations. I think it's at 1:30 Central. I don't have the time in front of me, though, but it's sometime tomorrow afternoon. So thanks for joining us. Have a great day, everybody, and be positive. Be brief when it's appropriate. Be verbose when it's appropriate, but strive for the happy middle. The happy medium is there. Recognize some cases call for brevity, some call for a little bit of verbosity, but don't use too many words. Use just as many as are required. Have a great day. Bye.